Now let's begin our panel discussion. It is really my honor to introduce my colleague, Dr. Crystal Navarro. Take it away, Crystal.
Thank you, Sharon. I first want to start out by saying thank you for being here. Like Sharon said, it's been a while, so is this really loud? Okay, it feels really loud to me. So I'm just going to give a brief history of the Collaborative Counseling Program. The Collaborative Counseling Program has been serving youth along the peninsula for almost 30 years, as Sharon has mentioned. And our incredible team of psychotherapists, our clinical psychologists and interns, we have a team of interns as well, serve high school students who are at the most risk, students who have experienced the deepest and darkest traumas. We work from a perspective that long-term therapeutic relationships are the core to building upon resilience in the face of these complex traumas. And we truly believe that our clients, I warned them that this is what I do. Oh man. Our clients, many of whom are from socioeconomically high-need families, truly deserve this high quality. Gosh, I'm so sorry. You know what? I'm going to do something really silly, but it might help me. I was grabbing my lip gloss from my purse earlier, and I found a little rat in my purse. Clearly, it's my son. I hate rats. So I know why it's in my purse, but. So these students really deserve this high-quality mental health service that we provide, a service that they would not otherwise receive. We don't focus, like Sharon said, we don't focus on numbers or the number of sessions we have with our clients, but we really focus on the relationship. We focus on the client's worth. We focus on their resilience. And it is truly the epitome of quality over quantity. The CCP program is unique because of this approach, this core value, this mission that is so important to Acknowledge Alliance and to the CCP team. We essentially bring the private practice to our students, and we are so honored to do so. These incredible beings empower us to continue working the way that we do, year after year. Because, like I said, it is so deeply what they deserve. We dream about, right now we serve high school students, but we dream about expanding it to continue serving them, as we said, once they graduate and continue on to college. Because the students terminate with our clinicians not because they don't need or want continued services, but simply because they've graduated from high school. So we'd love to continue serving them. So if we can get this pilot, we could provide services for an even longer period, which is just that much more rich in expanding these fields of hope. So I've said enough, I've cried enough. And I would really like for you to hear firsthand from some of the CCP team and from our special speaker, Dr. Megan O'Reilly, who really elevates through her research and experience the way that we envision our work. So I'm going to let each member come up all together and introduce themselves. Judith Gable, Dr. Megan O'Reilly, Gladys Gudino, and Eleanor. So I'm going to ask that each of you introduce yourself, and then talk a little bit about what brought you to this work as you introduce yourself.
And are you going to sit here?
Is it okay
Kristen?
if I stay here
Yes,
with my
it is-
rat?
It is fine. Should we? Here. All right. You want us to just begin?
Yes.
In any particular order? I'll start. Since I've been here the longest, I'm the oldest. I'm Judith Gable, and it is an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of the agency. And I've been a part of the agency for 27 years. Thank you. And, you know, you watched Crystal choke up, and that's because that's how deeply we feel about what we do and how deeply we care about the kids that we serve. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. These are youth that adolescents, I love adolescents. Many people don't because they're wacky, right? When they're in pain, the way they express their pain is not necessarily compelling, let's say. And, it often gets them punished or ignored or kicked out of places. And it is such an honor to have the opportunity to sit with these youth and to give them the space to try to understand why they're behaving in these wacky ways, because it's all ways that they've learned to cope and deal with some real tragedy that has happened in their lives, that's continuing to happen in their lives, and to be able to sit down with them in this very intimate sanctuary that we create as therapists, where nobody else gets to hear it, and they get to hear themselves. They get to experience themselves in this caring relationship, in this non-judgmental relationship, where we're not shocked by what they're doing, we're not put off, turned off. We're curious. We want to know, we want to understand, and they don't know and understand, right? They're just reacting. But by the time they do some therapy with us, they start to understand, and they start to get some insight into what they actually feel, what they think. They get to the space and the time to reflect, and it's gorgeous. And it's why Crystal still chokes up, and we still cry about the work we do, because many people don't get to see these youth in this way. They just see the defiant, rebellious, F you, kids, and that's not who they are underneath it all. The I don't give an F is really, I can't dare to care. I can't dare to care because there's nobody that's gonna take care of me. There's nobody that's gonna catch me when I fall. And so I need to stop. I could go on and on. Anyway, that's why I'm here. That's why I've been here. We have an amazing team. We continue to get incredible therapists come do the work, and we train interns to do this work and to see these youth in this way. And it's just so rich, and we really appreciate your support.
I can go next. My name's Dr. Megan O'Reilly. I use she, her pronouns. And I am a licensed counseling psychologist and a consultant. I'm the CEO of Inherent Value Psychology, Inc. I named my business that because it centers the worth and wellness of all people. So that's why I called it Inherent Value. And I'm here with this star-studded Alliance, Acknowledge Alliance team because my mission and the mission of Acknowledge Alliance is very much aligned around well-being, flourishing, thriving. And my areas of expertise are trauma and depression. So how do we get into those darker places and bring people into the light and remind them of their worth and set them on a path for their wellness and their excellence as students, as the future of tomorrow? So I'm here here to add to these voices up here and really kind of illuminate what we do in these closed offices that is really heroic work that gets unsung. So happy to answer those questions as we move along tonight. Thank you.
I can go ahead and go next. My name is Gladys Godino, kind of a familiar face maybe here. I started with Acknowledge Alliance in a kind of non-traditional way. After college, I started working at the Boys and Girls Club in Redwood City, and I was doing high school kind of college stuff. And during the day, the Boys and Girls Club was hosting there the community school, which is a school where students go once they have been kicked out of a mainstream, kicked out of an alternative, and left juvenile hall. Right, so there were students there that were getting schooling, and Acknowledge Alliance would go in there with interns and therapists and offer services. And it really interested me, and I was like, how do those people get to do that? So found my way at a couple other jobs, found my way to graduate school, and then said, I want to intern with Acknowledge Alliance. So we started a little kind of contract there between Santa Clara University and Acknowledge Alliance, and I got to do all of my training hours with CCP, with Judith, and I'm a licensed therapist now. Got licensed in 2018, and I'm still working with the agency about 8-9 years later. So I began working with the same students that were coming out of juvenile hall, transitioning back to the schools. Personally resonate with that. My father, I'm a daughter of immigrants. My father and his family were in and out of jail all of my life. So I think a part of me wanted to understand what goes on. Why do people find their way in these situations? A couple years later, the executive director, Susan, who is not here anymore, reached out and said, hey Gladys, you're at MA High School. One of my colleagues at another program has a student in crisis. Could you pull them to talk to them? So this was Peninsula Bridge, which is another program that does college, high school support for students that are high-driven, low-income students. So I identified with those students, right? I'm a woman of color, first-gen, low-income, academically driven. So I picked up that student and started doing some therapy there, and we have a contract now with them. We now offer services to middle school, high school, and college. I am the clinician for high school and college. And it's really neat now to be able to offer my experience to some of these students. I see students throughout California now. I've seen some for 5 years. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of those experiences. But Acknowledge Alliance feels like a perfect fit for me, right? Kind of the two halves that I kind of juggle in my life to be able to provide and to see the similarities that despite being different, the traumas, the experiences, the stress is pretty similar. So I'm excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eleanor. I also go by Ellie, but mostly at Acknowledge Alliance, I've gone by Eleanor. I think in an effort for my students to think I'm a little older than I am, just because I love it. I love the work with these high school students, but I do think that, as these wonderful women have mentioned, there are a lot of challenges that come with it, and I think one of the biggest ones is being both someone who's close to the students emotionally, that we understand who they are, but also someone who's a professional, an adult that they can trust is on their side. And that's not something that often happens for these kids. They have gone most of their life without a consistent adult figure. So I found Acknowledge Alliance early this year, so I'm very new here. I started in late January, but I love this organization because I really believe in the mission. I did my undergraduate at Stanford, where I did research with a professor where I interviewed homeless individuals, and that work led me to do my own research where I was like, what is making it so that some people end up homeless and struggling and some people succeed if they have all had a similar background? So to clarify that, what I mean is if someone has experienced trauma as a child, what makes it so that one person ends up at Stanford and one person ends up homeless? So through that research, what I really found was that if someone has had a very prominent mentor in their life, then that truly changes the trajectory of their experience. So if someone has had even just one person who has believed in them, it can make an enormous difference. It can change everything. So when I found Acknowledge Alliance, I was already working as a therapist. I was working in New York, but I was then in California. And I felt like I had to be a part of this wonderful organization because they are truly creating change for people from the ground up. So, Crystal.
Thank you. I'm going to ask just a couple more questions so that we can provide maybe a little bit of a deeper understanding of exactly what we do or how we do it. With the time remaining, I'm looking for the red and yellow. Okay, thank you. And this is for anybody to answer, to go ahead and just chime in and kind of popcorn with whatever, whoever wants to answer. So if we can talk a little bit about what is complex trauma and what kinds of trauma do you see in the work that we do?
Complex trauma is trauma that can be a number of things. Enduring, in other words, it's not one event necessarily, a car accident or one event that happened. It's something that goes on for a while. But also, typically with the youth that we see, it's multiple traumatic life experiences. And for the youth that we see, it's frequently multiple traumatic experiences that are recurring or continuous. So certainly abuse, physical, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. But there's also loss. There's the trauma of some of our youth who have lost family members to deportation or to murder. There's sex trafficking that some of the youth we work with have been through, drug addiction in the family or within themselves, gang involvement. So things that are really these ongoing traumatic events that, interestingly, some of our kids don't even see as trauma. Like, it's just normal. And that can often be some of the work that we do with them is you don't want to say, this shouldn't be happening to you. But this shouldn't be happening to you. But you do want to ease them into the idea that life could be different and that perhaps they deserve it's tricky, right? Because you don't want to negate the people in their lives. You don't want to act as though there's something wrong with them, that they've had these life experiences, and you also want to try to help give them some view of something different. And that starts with the relationship with the therapist, that they get to experience themselves in relationship with a therapist in this very safe, respectful way that they may not have ever had. So that's going into something else. Complex trauma. Anyone else?
I'll dive right in on the heels of that. The only type of trauma I'd add to that robust list that you just gave is vicarious trauma. So another element of trauma that's sometimes hard for those of us not experiencing that trauma to wrap our mind around is the trauma doesn't need to happen to you for it to affect you. It only needs to happen to someone maybe in proximity, so like a family member or a loved one, or even someone you don't know. Just our news cycle right now is a type of trauma all of us are inhabiting, right? And so if you're watching the news and someone from your identity group or some other group that you affiliate with is being harmed recurrently or constantly, that's going to impact you because you have an affiliation to that group. And a lot of times we can supplant ourselves, our brothers, mothers, sisters, for that person, right? And so just thinking about this last week with the different shootings knocking on people's doors, things like that. So racial vicarious trauma is definitely something that's just on top of what might be happening in the microcosm at home and in the community. And that's something that's hard to talk about because it's hard to claim, but it's in our zeitgeist. It's in the fabric of what these kids are breathing in on a daily basis. I think the other piece I just want to throw in here, even though it wasn't a part of the question, is post-traumatic growth. We know about post-traumatic experiences, but like my colleague said, if there's one person that can believe in you, kind of replant that seed of worth and that you deserve a different way of life, that can really change how someone metabolizes a trauma, right? That this is not just their lot they have to park in, that there can be a different life for them, then they can start imagining and dreaming and building something different. So trauma is complex. It needs a lot of time to unpack the different layers. And just to give an analogy, society would say, what's wrong with you? Someone who cares about you would say, what happened to you? A therapist would say, what happened to you and how is it affecting you? And a trauma-informed therapist would say, what has happened to you and your people and what keeps happening to you? So we include that systems level, that cultural level, that ancestral level, and the present tense level. Because sometimes we think trauma is like something that happened, ED, and is in the past. But how our brains work and how we metabolize it is that it's still happening. We're always kind of bracing. And if you're bracing, that you're not open to life. And that's what a lot of these students are dealing with.
And I just want to add quickly, because one of the things we pride ourselves in is the long-term work, and people want to know why. Why does it take so long? And one of the things about a youth who grows up with these complex traumas and intergenerational trauma is that you can't just ask them to leave their histories and their families and their environments. And so there's a lot of work that goes on with these kids as they're trying to understand that there might be a different way, but their families are still in this old way. And how do they stay connected? How do they stay attached and still move forward and move out? And it's really complicated, and it takes a lifetime, really, but it certainly takes more than 10 sessions, and it takes more than a year or two. Because they're processing it continually, and when that's the whole idea of seeing the kids post high school. They graduate from high school, which is a pretty sheltered environment in some ways, but then they're out in the world, and there's a strong family pull, and so how do you help them keep growing and staying connected but individuating? So it's complex. Yeah.
If possible, I'd love to add a little bit of this. Working with students in high school and now in college, the ability to see them once they've left their family system is so different, right? Because sometimes, one, symptoms don't show up until you've been removed from the environment that's caused the trauma. Or two, once you're taken out, you can see the dysfunction, you can see the substance abuse, you can see how your family system is different from others. And sometimes that doesn't happen until they go to college for a lot of our kiddos, right? Or once they leave high school and they're 18 and they can move out. So seeing the family pull, seeing families say, well, you need to take care of your mom, right? When a student is trying to find their voice. Or we talk about chosen family, right? When you realize incredible trauma that happened in your family, to then realize, okay, well, now I get to kind of pick my family and pick who I get to connect with and trust and reciprocate in that way. So it's really neat to be able to see students after they leave. I've been able to see kids now, they're like third-year college students, and part of it is also normalizing, like, yeah, that happens in college, right? Or like, yeah, suicide attempts in college campuses happen and it's not your fault, right? And to be able to just normalize some things, but also give them perspective of like, yeah, there's another way that things can be at the same time. So it's really nice to be able to do that. Just wanted to share how nice it is to work with young adults. Acknowledge Alliance has allowed us to do that. So it's really a gift to these students and the families and the generations that come.
And just to add to that, Gladys, that these students wouldn't receive these services otherwise. They don't have the funds for a private practice or a mental health counselor that's going to spend weeks and months with this relationship-based approach that we take. they would not have mental health support otherwise. So I'm getting the yellow card, so I have one more question. How do you see and nurture resilience in the face of these traumas? Feel free to give examples if you have any.
I can start with that one. I think to nurture resilience, I think, is to first and foremost put self-confidence into your client and to point out the good things about who they are, because a lot of these kids have never had anyone say anything positive about them, or if they have, it's been, just lost in a wash of insults and general, sense of you are not enough. And I think when I first see a client, my goal is first to get to know them as a person and not ask those hard questions of, what kind of trauma have you experienced right away. That'll come out on its own. But first, especially with the teenagers that I work with, it's, okay, what kind of video games do you play? Do you like to read? No? Oh, okay, well, what do you do for fun? You watch TikTok for 12 hours? Okay. But it sounds silly, but it helps to make the child feel heard and understood, and also to feel like you're not out here trying to make them seem stupid, which I think they get a lot of in the classroom, where they're not excelling and where they are struggling to even attend. So after I've kind of tried to get to know the student and I've gained some level of rapport with them, then we might start to talk about their family systems, might start to talk about what kind of living environment they have, all the while still checking in on, have you listened to the newest album of such and such rapper? Because that makes it real for them, that they're not just telling me about the terrible things in their life, but that I care about the things that make them happy too. So I guess for an example, my very first client with Acknowledge Alliance came to me directly after a suspension meeting. He'd just been suspended. This young man is 14 years old. And he came to me and we talked about his dreams of being a football star. He wants to be in the NFL. And then after like 30 minutes of talking, he's told me that he's getting death threats from 30-year-old men in a family that doesn't like his family. And it was astounding, really, because I'd only talked to him for 30 minutes to hear that him open up about what was going on, because he'd been suspended for being in a fist fight with another student on campus, and no one in the team of teachers and administrators who worked with him after his suspension knew about this. I was the only professional who he'd told, and it made me very sad, because he'd been out of school for a week and no one knew that he was getting death threats. And I worked with Judith to kind of figure out what I should do next. And I'm really pleased to say that he's not getting death threats anymore. We're still working on other things like his GPA and his social life and his home life. But it really made an impact on me, because I didn't go in there asking him, why were you suspended? It was more like, who are you? And then much more quickly than I could have ever imagined, he was ready to tell me about some of the scariest things going on in his life. So, yeah.
Thank you. I love the question of resilience. Does anyone cringe when they hear the word resilience? Okay. How about self-care? Oh, right. So in the spaces that I inhabit, sometimes a buzzword can kind of lose its original meaning. So I want to tell you what I think and what the original meaning of resilience is. So resiliere in Latin, to bounce back, right? So the psychology definition is, how long does it take for you to return to a pre-impacted state? And I think that definition is really important. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, I look at the words we use and what they actually mean, and then how we actually use them. So bounce back, return to pre-impacted state, that means resilience is actually about recovery, right? But at least in how we use it nowadays, resilience actually, we use it like the word persevere or endure. So when I'm doing workshops with students, especially first-generation low-income students, they feel this pressure to be resilient. They think they just have to make a way out of no way and keep mushing through. That's not resilience. Resilience is recover, replenish, and restore. It's actually about maybe even taking a break and replenishing, right? So it's actually a little bit of a paradigm shift we need to think about when we use that word, and how is it actually landing on our students. A lot of times it's as something else they have to do or something else they have to persevere in. So instead, talking to students about what actually replenishes you. How do you take breaks? Do you have self-care guilt, which is a thing? Some of us in here have that. Can you do nothing? And they'll say, Dr. Megan, what do you mean nothing? I mean, not scrolling. I mean, actually letting yourself get bored. There's a lovely TED talk about the power of being bored and what happens when you let your brain actually idle and you're not distracted by something, right? And so for me, what I do with students for resilience, any client really, is first I give them that paradigm shifting idea that it's about replenishment and recovery and acknowledging that you've been impacted. Like we've said before, so many people, some of us too, are just enduring and going that we don't actually pause to notice that we've been impacted by a trauma, vicarious or personal, or that we're burning out, or that we're already scorched. So to actually pause long enough to acknowledge that I'm impacted, and then to acknowledge that I need recovery, and then to think about what would that recovery look like for me. And that's the fun part. Like, what brings you joy? Sometimes I like to ask students, what could you give a TED Talk about right now with no preparation? And whatever that thing is, that's a passion point. You know, send them on a joy scavenger hunt. You know, be on the lookout this week for the things that made you feel joy, or the times you lost track of time. That's another good one. And so resilience is about recovery. And I think as a culture, we need to be thinking about that, because it's always about the grind and the hustle and the side and securing the bag. What about how we actually feel on the inside, and what our worth is really about? Connection, creativity, and sharing that with our loved ones.
Thank you, Dr. Megan. That is our time, but before I feel like, you know, the Oscars when they start playing the music and it's like, get off, lady. I will never get an Oscar, so this is my moment. We are almost done, but I do have one special thank you that we just wanted to share with all of you before we truly end. So our former CCP director, Judith Gable, who you've all heard from, has been such an integral part to this mission that we so deeply care about. And I've never met a clinician, a supervisor, a mentor, a human being that cares about the communities in which we work the way that Judith Gable does. I'm grabbing my rat. Judith, the CCP team is incredibly grateful for you. And we just wanted to thank you and honor you. You motivate us, you empower us, and you drive the value of warmth and relationship. Thank you.